Hello and welcome to another episode of HUNAR CHARCHA. This one comes in collaboration with the Indian Photo Festival, which is why we have two amazing photographers, one of whom is joining us all the way from London. He spends his time between London and Mexico City. His name is Adam Wiseman. And the other photographer is T. Narayan, who's based in New Delhi and has a career of more than 3 decades photographing some of India's most milestone events. The artist photographer that we have today has spent over 3 decades in the news genre of photography. He has been associated with some of the best known publications in India. These include Outlook Magazine, Open Magazine, Hindustan Times, India Today, which is just to name a few of them. In his vast career, he has been photographing some of the most milestone events in contemporary Indian history, which include the militancy in Punjab and Kashmir, the riots associated with the Mandal Commission, the Babri Masjid demolition, and presently he is documenting the effects the corona pandemic has had on the lives of ordinary Indians. In fact, I have been following Narayan's work since he began to put his photographs on his pages shortly after the lockdown was announced. And these pictures were very moving because one has seen pictures of pandemics and human tragedies before. But the pictures that Narayan put out were really touching in their pathos, in their in their ability to encapsulate the whole situation in a very, very dignified manner that brought out the full pathos of the situation. I remember particularly these photographs of burials and cremations that were happening of COVID patients. There was one particular picture where there is a lot of dust flying in the air, and there are just two family members who are actually carrying out the whole ceremony of burial, and they are entirely covered in PPE suits. And the idea that one gets when you see the picture cursorily, immediately you think of man's landing on the moon, because the PPE suit gives the impression of someone who is covered in a spacesuit sort of situation. And when you look further into the picture, you realize that this is a big tragedy that is unfolding in our midst, and this photographer has been able to capture that essence of that tragedy beautifully and amazingly. So very warm welcome, Narayan, to our talk.
Thank you so much, Dhiraj. Thank you.
Yeah. I'd like us to begin with your pictures of the COVID series that you have been taking in the capital, especially. I'd like to begin right at the beginning, the earliest pictures that you took when the lockdown was announced. So let's start from there.
Dhiraj, you know, when it was announced, like I was covering Trump that time, and in the background, it was going on that something major is happening and in other countries are facing some major problems and so on. So when Trump, I think when Trump left and after a few days, the whole thing was coming out, what exactly is happening, and the first lockdown for a day or two, and then, you know, the major lockdown on the 21st of March, I think it was 21st or 22nd, 21st of March. Then some sort of seriousness, people, you know, it went into it that, yes, something major is happening and something is seriously wrong. And first 2-3 days when the lockdown happened, it was a very easy kind of a thing. All right, go to the city, shoot something. When suddenly these migrants started to walk, when shops, when factories started to shut down and started telling them to, you know, we can't pay you salaries, or we are closing down, and these guys migrating back to, you know, their villages, walking down miles, then everything, you know, we got into action that something major is bound to happen, you know. So this is when it started.
Right. I was particularly curious about this fact because you have been in the news business for a very, very long time.
Yeah.
And someone who has been following, events, and we all know that events happen like no one plans for them. They just happen like that. And you have to
Yes.
be on the go immediately to start shooting. Did you think that did you foresee the enormity of this whole COVID situation when it began? Could you
As,
foresee your training?
yeah, right. As I told you earlier, initially I didn't, but when the migrant thing started, then
Right.
I got into the thing that yes, something really major, because you have never seen thousands, lakhs moving on everything stands still, nothing moving, and people are just walking as if some partition has happened. No
Right.
railways, no flights, no
Right.
buses,
But in
nothing
fact,
on
the
the
only
road.
reference we have of people walking on the roads is actually of partition, when
Off
people
partition,
both sides were
absolutely.
walking like that. And that is probably the only
Absolutely, with their small
visual
children
reference that
or
we have.
whatever they have carrying on their heads, and one child on mother's head or father, and pulling along the whole family. My God, it was something to really see, and very painful to see the
Right.
sufferings that they had
Right.
gone through.
And in fact, when the lockdown was announced, people did not foresee this movement of migrants to happen, because this was totally out of the blue that came out, especially for ordinary citizens. One didn't foresee it, and I'm sure the government also, which the government should have, but it didn't foresee this happening. What was because everyone was indoors, and these were the only people on outside, in a way forced to cover these huge
and
distances.
and and these were the only pictorially, visually representing corona that time, because we
Right.
were not covering the hospitals, or we were that we were not getting the right figures, how many people are getting into the hospital, what is the seriousness. But this was the event that had overtaken the hospitals and the deaths. It was
Right.
this mass movement of people, migration of people,
And
that
it is not an ordinary situation, because there's a very stark contrast with the road, which is usually the highway. The highway used to be busy, but in these scenarios, the highway was absolutely sort of deserted, and there's this only group of people walking along the side of the highway.
walking miles and miles and miles. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
I had shot people from Bhatinda. They started walking, and they had already walked 6 days here. They're a group of 8 people with I think 4 or 5 small, 2 infants, and they had to walk another 700 kilometers. Can
Right.
you imagine what's the plight? And they have no food, nothing. Everywhere they're stopping under a flyover, and it was word of mouth that people started spreading. There are some 100 people waiting here. Can you please send some food for them?
Mhm.
This is where all the good citizens came into act and started providing
Right.
food, and this thing happened.
Tell us something about the pictures of the cremation sites and the burial sites, because
Oh,
those were very stark pictures, and they.
yeah. Initially, we were all very hesitant to go there, since
Mhm.
uh, everything, like, we were very scared, in the sense that going to those kind of places, you are putting your life into tremendous
Exactly.
amount of risk.
Right. Right.
And slowly we came to know that these were more or less safer places to go and shoot, because when the bodies are sent from the hospital for cremation or for the burial, it is whatever you call, they are embalmed and kind of stuff, that there's no major risk of the virus
Infection.
coming out of the bag, but it is the risk of the people who are coming along with the
Right.
for the cremation or for the
The
burial,
family or friends.
which was later restricted to only 5 people or 10 people. So it was easier. And then going and covering there and waiting for the whole day for bodies to arrive. These bodies were brought in by the health workers in a stretcher or whatever it is.
Mhm.
None of the relatives, none of the people, they even came close to touch it or anything.
Oh, okay.
Pandit, all these pandits and all, they kept calling the relatives. Please, one of the relative, you come, you have to do the last rite, you have to do. And from
Mhm.
a distance only, they would say, Pandit ji, aap hi kar lijiye, aap hi kar lijiye, karke.
Mhm. Because of
This
the
was
fear people
this
had
is
about
this was the
taking
kind
the.
of fear. Yeah.
Right.
And hats off to these health workers who, who performed all the puja and everything before cremating a body.
Yeah, this picture is also amazing and very beautifully captured the moment.
Yes, the last rites.
Because these are health workers doing probably the job they never in their lives expected to do. I'm very interested in the way you have composed a lot of these pictures, because there is obviously an urgency which everyone in the news business understands to get the picture out or to send the picture to your respective publication or agency. But with your pictures, Narayan, especially, there is a beautiful sense of composition, and there is the urgent narrative, which is sort of riding on the shoulders of a very well thought out sense of aesthetics and sense
the pain has to come out. The pain has to be shown. What exactly people are suffering from, and when you have a nice situation or something like that, as a photographer, if you can't compose a beautiful frame out of that, anyway, situations, we might call it beautiful, but painful situations, so absolutely. And then image, they just look very different. Like this image where the guy who's on the mound, holding the this thing. He's the guy who has done majorly all the burials in Delhi, and he gets only $100 per body for this thing,
And he's risking his life to do this.
He's risking his life, and he never got himself checked or anything like that.
So, for example, fact, we don't realize in this sort of noise for COVID warriors, so-called COVID warriors.
And Dhiraj, this image of slippers kept in circles.
Yes.
I don't know people remember or not, when we were in our younger days, whenever we used to, everything was in short supply. You remember milk, DMS milk, or whatever it is. There used to be long queues for people who would line up early in the morning. So they would come and keep something there that this is my, I'm third in line or fourth in line. And then they'll go back for 4 or 5 hours, come back in the evening and say, yes, I was the third person. So this reminded me, see, people, they're still in their marked circles and all. They're kept their slippers, and then they've gone back, and they know 1:30 the food will come. And they come back to collect their food,
What was the reason that you decided to keep all of these or most of these pictures in black and white? Because
see, when I was comparing them with color and all, to me, I thought that it was not stark enough, or it was not, what do you call? It was not coming out that way. What effect the black and white was giving, it was giving that starkness to these kind of images. What I'm showing majorly, So that's why I thought I should go into black and white and be there.
Yeah, so that was a sort of aesthetic decision that you took on bringing out.
Like this image, two guys sleeping, tired and exhausted and sleeping. Yeah. Here, that redness of the evening setting sun and all that thing. So I wanted to keep that. So I kept it in color, that to show that the whole day. Look at this image, the small boy, he's just sleeping, and the way his father is holding him, This is at the border. This is at the border waiting for the buses. And, there is a great story. There is a image. If we can go back, it's a color image, I think. If the slides can go back a little, where he's sitting with the kid with his red eyes. Yeah, this one. This one. This one. Yes. Just look at his expression. Dhiraj, I was there for 2 days, with these guys for 2 days, morning till evening morning. First day, they couldn't get any kind of transport because there were 8 people and there were 3 infants. And this guy was leading them. And every day, a truck, every now and then a truck stopped, all 8 would run towards them. And then dejectedly, come back because the
guy was not ready to take them.
No, it was not going to their village, that side or
that
whatever.
Direction,
Yeah, that next, and the next second day when I saw these guys were totally exhausted. They were given even enough food, all these NGOs, and they were wasting food and everything. But when he got a truck to sit with, he managed to get those 4 ladies inside and the kid and everything. And the expression, it was red and literally tears in his eyes, that at last he has got something to, go back.
Right.
I was really moved by, this was the situation I was really moved,
Absolutely. These must have been very moving experiences,
very painful
for you as a photographer to go in situations like these, which were so charged up, emotionally charged up, and difficult to sort of navigate. How do you compare these moments that you had in the COVID series to your other assignments, which have been equally emotionally charged, say a riot situation or something else?
See, here the thing was, there was a threat from all over. Like, with whom the person standing next to you or wherever you are, you don't know with whom you are standing. So that kind of fear was always there. Every day coming back home, immediately stand out, remove your shoes, remove your clothes, put them in a a bucket full of Dettol and all that kind of stuff. Then because you are bringing the enemy home.
Right.
You don't know who, when and where you will hurt your this thing also, family also.
So in many ways it was something totally unprecedented for you as well, coming with that kind of
I've never
experience
seen.
that you have.
I have covered everything, only except Indira Gandhi's assassination. After that, I have covered everything, because I came into the thing in '87.
Right.
When I started my profession, and after that, you name the thing, I have covered it, but not of this kind of a situation. Because I'm doing Kashmir militancy. I know who my enemy is. I know where I'm entering. I know from where I have a threat. Punjab, I know where, but here I didn't know, and at the same time I'm going to get the enemy home.
I like this picture a lot, because the caption says that it's a homeless person, but it is beautiful.
Dhiraj, there is a great thing to it. I wish I had a wide shot of this. I took this image the day helicopters were, showering flowers over AIIMS and all, for the great work the doctors were doing.
Right.
And this alone guy walking with a stick down below on the road, don't know where to go. It was that kind of a situation. One, they're celebrating there, and what is happening here? This is Anand Vihar bus depot. So these DTC buses, they bring the people to a point. From here, they change bus to their respective villages. Because the UP roadways is next door. So they change the buses there and they go. So here he is saying good news, and the kind of, it made a nice composition,
Yes, absolutely. And I think someone who's been in the news especially has a very keen eye for these kinds of small idiosyncrasies which sort of creep into your frame without you realizing. And maybe later on when you're looking at your pictures, you say, oh, ye bhi tha, I didn't realize it then. So your experience with health workers, because a lot has been said about them, and obviously the government wants to call them COVID warriors.
Oh, hats off to them. Yeah.
Right.
These not getting paid, not getting their, because all these health workers, they're in sort of, stipend they get, about 4,000 rupees a month. And even that they have not got for, last 3 months or 4 months, but still they're doing the work. My God, it's amazing.
They're doing more than what they used to do, in fact.
Absolutely. Right? Amazing. It's just amazing,
I especially like the one where the person is performing a sort of dance in the middle of a ward, wearing his I don't know who
even this frame, we can go back where she has put the swab in her nose. In the person's nose, and she's talking to someone, and that poor guy is, waiting with her swab.
Right. So these were the few humorous moments that one came across while taking pictures. So how did that picture come about, where the person is dancing sort of in the ward and
that's what happens is every day these health workers once in a day or twice a day, they teach them yoga. So this yoga is also little different. They play with the modern music and all, and they do, so that these people are also happy. They try to.
This is a quarantine ward.
Pardon me? They're in quarantine center in, Commonwealth Center.
Okay.
Games complex but this was happening in all the quarantine centers. They would do yoga morning and evening, 5:30, 6 o'clock, with, some sort of, in a much, way, in a happier way than bringing a very seriousness to it. Do this yoga, do that yoga.
Of course, these pictures that you've taken of the people who are actual characters in this whole saga, but you have taken these side shots, which are also very interesting. I like the one of that sniffer dog standing with the uniformed guard, and he's just sitting there.
Yeah, and that was the first day. That was the first day when they resumed the train services, metro services, and they brought these dogs along, to. Anyway, I thought why the dog was there. There was no bomb threat or anything like that. It was basically coronavirus, and they had other things to check there. But this poor guy was just lying around and, in a corner and just watching with his, beautiful eyes, people moving around. So it was a beautiful frame that, And this is the old Delhi railway station, all the stand still, man. Everything stands still.
You have sort of got a way to compare Delhi, because since you're based in Delhi, to nothing that anyone has seen before, absolutely deserted. I don't think even in the worst of times in the under Section 144 or full-time curfew has Delhi been like this.
Yes.
So how did you find Delhi in that sense where it's totally, absolutely deserted? I don't think
on the other side of it, on the humor part of it, during that time I got 7 speeding challans for 2,000 rupees each. Because
right.
So you can imagine how
so
much
you
I
mean
was
the
enjoying
cops
the
were
roads.
very vigilant at this time?
No, the cameras,
Okay, the cameras.
But they were out of the blue. They were working. So you can imagine how we were enjoying ourselves just driving around on 100 speed and all, I have never seen this kind of a thing. So I could connect it only to partition, that this kind of stuff would have happened then, when everything was standstill, people were just walking. There was nothing else. Because in my lifetime, nothing, what majorly have happened are riots, Mandal Commission, all those kind of stuff where there are,
there were crowds, in fact, just the opposite.
There were crowds and 2 parties fighting with each other.
Yes.
So here you don't know with whom you are fighting, So that way, it was quite scary, but I saw Delhi in a very different kind of a atmosphere,
Did you take some other pictures which are not COVID related, which are totally?
Yeah, I did. Yes, I did some, monuments and all where you should, because the kind of sky we were getting, the kind of, the thing we were getting, we could never shoot document these kind of image. They were just documentary shots, but such neat and clean documentary shots were great, I really enjoyed shooting them.
So as a photographer, that time was great because it was a time of tragedy, unforetold tragedy. But at the same time, you saw Delhi like one would have loved to see, but never got to see.
Yes, and from very close quarters.
Does it get sometimes a bit too heavy on your mind and soul, covering news events and very tragedies happening?
This is the way I take a break.
This is
every now and then I will go for wildlife, or I'll go for some festival, and take a break. Just go inside a forest and sit for 4 or 5 days, just.
So you're still indulging the photographer in you, but you're not doing your general news.
No, I do. Dhiraj, now I represent, do all news assignments for Bloomberg.
Sarina Saifa wants to know, can you talk about how you approach people to gain their cooperation in being photographed?
See, everything, all human beings, anyway, you take any living object, it has a comfort zone. So if you try to intrude into it without any reason or without any this thing, you cannot get great images. So best thing is to approach your subject very smoothly, softly, be, in a comfort zone and see that the subject is not getting disturbed or whatever it is. And subject to subject matter, it varies. So
were there any special sort of protocol that you were following when you were shooting people walking on the road?
See, protocols were from our side only, not to get too close, because you don't know whether they're infected, not to touch them, not to, all those standard operating procedures, what they call in this situation, So all those kind of stuff was there. But अब कहते हैं ना, भावनाओं में तो बह ही जाते हैं फिर आप लोग, जब आप खींच रहे हैं अंदर से, और फिर मन करता है इससे और अच्छी खींचूं. You don't know where you land up.
When you find a good subject, you sort of zoom in further.
Yeah, so you just get into the flow and shoot images.
Yeah. Someone wants to know, as a reportage photographer, you're mostly amidst action. But when you work on longer projects, you have a lot of time to spend with your subject. A luxury not many newspaper photographers get. What will be some of your tips to a photographer who has done reportage and now working on a long-term project that spans over several years? Confining yourself just to reportage style may not justify the body of work.
See, when you, being a journalistic photographer, and when you're doing a project or something like that, first of all, you have to read your subject, understand your subject from A to Z. How you're going to break your story, how you're going to start the story, how you have to build the whole thing, and then approach. And some of the projects are endless. See, coronavirus project might linger on for a longer time till the vaccine comes. It might end up with a happy face guy getting injected, and the day,
or the first vaccination,
or the day when people say the last guy is being vaccinated and corona is gone, which they are saying 2023 they'll declare corona-free world, sort of. I think WHO has said, or something like that. So that is the kind of approach you need to have. You need to understand your subject, get into it, spend some time reading about it, get into the depth of it. Then you start shooting, not just that, get into it.
I think for any sort of photography, reading is very important, because reading adds layers, and you don't just have to read about your subject. You read different tangential texts also.
There are so many things attached to it. It's not necessary that that corona you have to shoot only this. Why will I shoot a dog for corona?
Yes, exactly.
So that dog was playing a role there.
Aquin wants to know, do you take a political stand when you're working on projects which are not aligned to your own political beliefs and affiliations? How do you resolve that? How do you approach a subject in such situations?
See, political stand, I will say, no, I don't generally take a political stand while shooting images. But when you are putting a body of work, and if it is, say, this thing, body of work is something positive or negative about this thing, then it might give us suggestion that it's a political statement against the government or for the government. Or
it may have a slant maybe on retrospect, on hindsight, but you don't.
But I did not now
actively take that stance.
Shooting demonetization, we were shooting people getting this thing, losing money and all that kind of whatever images were happening that time. But we were shooting images not keeping what the government has done. We were shooting what the guy is going through because of the demonetization.
And also, I would like to add at this point, because the training that we got in journalism was to be like politically agnostic, not to have a
neutral. Yes.
When you're going for a story, you're going for a story for its own narrative and own sort of where, why, what, how. You were not looking to give it a slant. The slant only happened once you came back to your newsroom and started sort of recollecting or started dwelling upon that, or also which publication you were part of. But when you are out there on the field, I don't think it really affects you that much. I mean, you may love someone as a subject, you love Modi as a subject, but you may not agree with him politically. You may not agree with someone and not like him as a subject. So there are a lot of permutation combinations.
Yeah, whenever I used to shoot Modi's moods or something like that, put it on Facebook, I used to get comments, you only know how to bring out this, this part of the Modi and all. but I was shooting, keeping something else in my mind, you know.
Right. What advice would you like to give to emerging photographers who want to take up photojournalism?
हिंदी में एक बड़ी सुंदर सी कहावत बताता हूँ. You know, उस जमाने में क्या होता था? People used to call and say, Narayan, yaar, do you have some photographer's job? मैं बोलता था, क्या हुआ यार? What happened? Yeah, my son is not good in studies. He's doing nothing. so you know, so that thing should not be there. Now, photographers are playing such a critical role. They have to be really educated, learned, and they are the guys who are bringing, you know, stories
Alive.
Yeah. Visually, people are seeing your TV, your stills, and your this thing. You have to get into photojournalism. It needs more than that, you know.
Right. What I would like to know, like, what is your own personal mantra to sort of keep evolving as a photographer, keep the eye, which is very important.
You know, but every day morning, this is what I do. I read the newspapers, and on the net I see what I learned as a photo editor was every day I used to look for thousands of images in different agencies because there were so many stories I had to cater to, you know, and looking at the way the different kind of photographers were shooting the same subject. You know, AP photographer will have a different kind of image, Reuters will have a AFP, you know, Magnum will have a different, all that kind of stuff. So that thing kept building in, you know. So every day I read newspapers, every day I see images, and then I think how I can do it differently, you know.
It was really a pleasure learning so much
great.
from your vast and amazing experience as a photojournalist and now as a freelancer who's taken some of the most brilliant images of this year, I feel, of this whole pandemic and how it is affecting people's lives. Thank you once again for being
Thank
with
you
us.
so much, Dhiraj. Thank you so much. And I would be grateful if any of young photographers need my help. They can directly approach me. I can guide them how to go about it.
Adam has been in the business for more than 2 decades, and he has contributed to some of the best known publications around the world, like New York Times, National Geographic, Wallpaper Magazine, The Guardian, Vice, to name just a few. Today, what we are going to talk about essentially is his series called Architectura Libre, or Free Architecture in English, where he sort of documents the very idiosyncratic architecture of some towns and rural habitats of Mexico. This is essentially the creation of Mexican immigrants living in the US who have sort of saved up their money and built these houses for themselves. And they are absolutely fantastical, the houses, which we'll see in the slides later. They have elements from all over the world. There are Chinese pagodas, there are Swiss chalets, and there are Japanese minimalistic houses, all sort of strewn around this skyline of Mexico, which Adam has been documenting for quite some time. It's a long-term project that he's been working on, and we will see some of these slides. What I found really interesting about these photographs was that earlier we were familiar with the work, with the lives of immigrant. When the immigrant is in flight or he's leaving his native context, his native country, and the other is the immigrant arriving in the new country. Besides these two aspects of the immigrant's life, we have not seen something as interesting as Adam's work, where he sort of shows us an immigrant in a very different mood, in a very different setting, sort of navigating his return, where if I could use this book title by V.S. Naipaul, where he talks about the enigma of arrival. In a sense, this is the enigma of return, where the immigrant is returning, not quite the person that he left, but a composite of many different sort of parts, where he is He has a visual sort of dictionary where he's absorbed so many influences and cultures in his stay in a new land where he was working. And that he sort of brings back to relive and create in these monumental buildings, which are truly monumental. They may not have the size and scale of a, but they are truly monumental in its imagination, in how it reimagines living spaces in a country which is so not familiar with what has been going on in this immigrant's mind. So I'd like to invite Adam now to begin his slideshow, and we'll just go talk as we go along. Is that okay?
Yeah. Thank you so much for the invitation, and I'm very flattered and to be a part of this amazing festival, and very sad not to be there in person. And thank you so much for inviting me to present this project, which I think has many parallels with India, and as you say, has this. In fact, I went to India just before the pandemic. Well, while the pandemic was starting to spread, but before I was no longer able to visit India, and was exactly looking for those parallels and those differences. I spent some time in Tiruvannamalai and in Pondicherry, and it was a really, truly eye-opening experience. Mexico, very similar to India, has a massive population. I mean, in Mexico, it's very dense. India has obviously a lot more space, but definitely has a huge population. So housing is always an issue. The government has tried to tackle it in ways that are often not great for the people who live in the houses, and are a solution that looks good on paper for politicians in terms of how many houses are built. These houses, I mean, in this case, for example, I like to read into this house, probably not intentionally, but it looks a lot like the Falling Water house of Frank Lloyd Wright's. But that, of course, is me probably reading into it a little too much. But these houses are often financed with remittance money, with the money that's sent back from Mexicans working in America. There's a lot of symbolism behind these houses. And I think nowadays we think of houses as such functional things that it's really unusual to think of them not as shelter, but as metaphor, as something that's much more symbolic. And so that's
one of the places, one of the articles about your work also mentioned that the houses were in fact a way of rebelling against the sort of regulation architecture of the government. They wanted to create something so opposed to what the government has in mind for them. So do you think there's also an element of rebellion in sort of building these structures which are so unique?
One of the common denominators in these houses all over the country, when I talked to people about them, was this expression of individuality. How important it was that their house does not look like their neighbor's house, or it doesn't look like anyone else's house, because they feel that way, that they might have failed, that it's all about originality. So I think, but as you say, these government houses are all exactly the same, and this is in its own way definitely a rebellion against that. Some are sort of inspired by Disney, or by children's stories, or by a sort of a Eurocentric ideal of what a house or a mansion should look like. And others are inspired by a more sort of American suburbia feel, but it's unusual because these, there are a lot of castles, as you can see.
Right.
But the theme of castles is repeated often. But you'll get these amazing forms, which, for example, in India, what I found where the finishes were amazing. Like there is a geometry in the painting, and there is a sort of postmodern aspect to it that was really, really impressive. But the form in Mexico, the finishing isn't quite as impressive, but the form is much more interesting. So you'll get these houses that are designed to be built with much lighter materials. So the engineering behind building a house like this with concrete and concrete roofs is really quite impressive also. You know, people were saying, look, if you feel that you can't do something and that stops you from doing it, then you're never going to learn in life. The fact that you can't do something means that you have to try and maybe fail or make mistakes. And I found that incredibly inspirational for the development of this project in itself, where I developed a way of exhibiting it during a pandemic, which was completely unconventional, where I made these little kits that get sent to your house, and you can have the exhibition for 2 weeks, and then it gets sent back to you and you get sent it off to another house. So
wow.
it was quite inspiring, this project in itself.
It's interesting that you mentioned about how they sort of approach this whole project, that they have for building themselves a house. It's also very true of the artist's work, where you want to attempt things that have not been attempted before. You want to sort of push the boundaries of your work and knowledge base and everything, which is also what they're doing. So in a way, it's a very creative enterprise for people who are not probably schooled in the whole way art functions and artists function.
Well, I couldn't agree more. I think that if I learned anything from this project, from the doing this project, was that you really have to be open to the lessons that others can teach you. There's a lot of sort of classism and racism when I present this work in Mexico. They're seen as, you know, horrific and bad taste and just, you know, naive and ridiculous and kitsch. But I pursue this project with a lot of seriousness, and I try and represent the dignity behind them. And so it's been quite a challenge to make people understand that it's not, you know, me, this foreign looking, because I don't look very Mexican, with a very foreign name, going in and taking funny pictures of funny Mexican eccentric houses. It's a lot more serious than that. And I think that that's been a bit of an uphill struggle, but I think people have understood that. And I think that people who would have disregarded these houses as absurd and outrageous are actually learning to appreciate them. And it's become part of a dialogue in very serious academic circles now in Mexico. One of the unusual things I discovered actually was, aside from the remittance houses, the houses being built by Mexicans in America, the money that they send back, I went to a couple of autonomous communities in Chiapas, indigenous communities that have managed to carve out a sort of a political autonomous environment where the government gives them a space to rule themselves and allows them to make the decisions that they want to make. And as a result of that, they haven't let multinational companies come into their villages. So here, this is a very common chain of stores in Mexico. You'll see them all over the place, 24-hour stores. They're called Oxxos, and you'll see them on every single corner. So in these communities, instead of an OXXO, you would get an OSSO, which is, you know, it's their version of it. But because of that, they have a wealth that they wouldn't have had if that were not the case, if that autonomy was not the case. And so this is what the people from this community look and dress like. They're hundreds, thousands of year old community. And they're building these really eccentric, funky houses with this newfound wealth that definitely is inspired aesthetically with the architecture of migrants. So it's really quite interesting finding these parallels in this new contemporary landscape of Mexico, because people think of Mexico, they think of, you know, this idyllic colonial architecture of mud houses and tiled roofs, but that is colonial architecture. That's not Mexican, that's Spanish architecture. And so this is really, when we think of contemporary Mexico, I like to sort of push this idea of this is what really contemporary Mexico is all about. Its architecture represents the migrant's experience and how that is interpreted locally also.
So like you mentioned about the indigenous communities also sort of learning from this immigrant experience of building houses, it seems like it's a movement that is infectious and it's spreading to different corners of the country where people are sort of accepting this kind of architecture, free architecture, and embracing it totally with open arms and going for it. Do you think there is in that sort of nascent movement of new architecture that we might see in the years to come, where sort of pastiche architecture would develop out of Mexico?
I think that definitely time will probably change our perspective. I think that I'm sure in its moment, Baroque architecture was seen as pretty over the top and horrific and heavy and maybe even kitsch by some communities. And this is a sort of neo-Baroqueness. This is, I mean, what really attracts me to this kind of architecture is, and the reason it's called free architecture is because it's free of these constraints. It's free of building codes. It's free of academia. And it's a freedom to truly express what you want to express without, for example, it's also free of the market. So usually any changes that we do in our own houses, we're taking into consideration whether it's going to increment in value or not. And if it isn't, then we're not going to do it because we're always thinking about reselling our house. Whereas these houses are built, if someone wants to put their bedroom in the kitchen because they spend lots of time in the kitchen, they're free to do that. When I went to these communities, I thought, well, what would it look like in the graveyard? Maybe that kind of architecture is also there for the afterlife. So I went to a graveyard and I found that this kind of architecture is also present there, and I found that really, really interesting. Also, like this sort of idea of individuality and aspiration. I mean, of course, there's a lot of aspiration involved.
So it carries on to the afterlife as well, this aspirational.
Exactly, in comfort and luxury.
I would like to point you to the work of an architect. His name is Gautam Bhatia, I think. And he has sort of classified Indian architecture down the years since independence onwards, how communities in India have sort of internalized. So, and he's given them very funny names as well. So there's Banya Baroque. Banya is this trader community in India. And and because they had a lot of access to money and they were money lenders traditionally, so they built houses which were full of Baroque elements where there was a lot of color and carving and not a space was left bare. So he came up with this term of Banya Baroque. And similarly, he's given these names to different styles where people, communities have copied, internalized, brought from outside. Different aspects that they loved and they thought would be well suited to their own living spaces. Some of it fits in very comfortably with their social context and their the functional element of it. But some of it obviously does stand out because it doesn't fit into the functionality of it. But and these were people who were not migrating elsewhere. They were learning from, as some of Mexico's earlier housing also shows, from the colonial experience, where the colonial architecture was so grand and so imposing that it was inevitable that it would have a trickle-down effect and people would start sort of using it to sort of show their own position in the pecking order. So India has had, in this sense, a tradition of, and there was a time in the 70s, there were a lot of Bauhaus buildings. Everyone was doing that sort of building in the big cities as well. And this is much after our independence much after that, because most of the colonial architecture was before independence, and these influences started coming in much later. Do you also think there is an element of there is certainly an element of vanity, or being a show off, in the sense of what you've achieved in life, and where how to sort of show the money that you've made?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think definitely these houses are monuments to success, or to perceived success. I think there's an interesting symbolism also, that with a little reflection seemed quite interesting to me, that because as many of these houses are not actually lived in by the people who are financing them, there's this idea of not only displacement, which is birthed of migration, but of actually replacement, where these houses actually replaces the migrant who's no longer able to be in his village. So there's this really sort of interesting idea behind having to leave your home because you can't live there anymore, because of economic opportunity. So you leave your home to find work in order to make money to build a home that you can't live in.
Have you traveled to Punjab, where there are a lot of villages where every family has at least two people from there living, especially in Canada or the US. And in fact, in one of my visits to a village in Punjab, I was quite surprised that every family is known by the country where their family member is living. So I was looking for one particular person, and they said, oh, that guy from Sweden, he's not actually Swedish, but he's working in Sweden, but he's known as so-and-so Sweden Wale. Wale is this term that we use in Hindi. So Sweden Wale so-and-so, or Germany Wale so-and-so, or France Wale so-and-so. That's how people were known. So obviously I got a sense of how these associations were being used to show yourself in the social order of the village, which if you were living in a much more prosperous country, you had really truly arrived in a sense. So for your work, I would really suggest that you do visit Punjab maybe next time.
No, absolutely. And I have definitely, I have in my research come across it, and I definitely, my good friend Sayan Hazra, who's a talented photographer who's helping me in Tiruvannamalai, suggested it also. So I definitely, once I'm able to travel again, it's definitely something I will consider. In another project of mine, the Tlatelolco Desmentido, where I took pictures here, where the building was a protagonist of my project. It was the architecture. There's a whole series I did with this choreography of lights on the exterior, where people had to turn on and off their lights in this sort of dance of lights. But the individuality of the community is what I needed to represent also. And so I decided to do a series of family portraits, but without the family. And so through the lived in space, you get an idea of who lives there. And so again, I think, you have to sort of think in more metaphoric terms instead of in literal terms. I think documentary can get very boring very quickly if we're being told what to look at instead of being encouraged to use our imagination to fill in the empty spaces.
It's interesting because you have mentioned this idea of aesthetics of ideas, where you sort of you have internalized the aesthetics of it, but now your main focus is on the ideas, which is very evident in your architectural series. What is the story? What is the idea behind all these series of photographs, which is also, I think, very important for budding photographers and budding artists to realize how important that that heart of the whole work is what is it that you're trying to say, or what is it that you're trying to understand yourself. That's very important too. The biggest, the most successful artistic project is where you're led by your own curiosities without forgetting everything that you've learned, forgetting everything that you've sort of internalized over the years.
I couldn't agree more. I think that that photography is only a medium of expression, and so it's only as good, your photography project is only as good as the idea behind it. Unless you're, you know, of course, commercial photography serves a very different purpose, and that's completely valid, and that requires it not only creativity and good ideas, but it also requires very good technique. So, I mean, I'm speaking in terms of sort of more artistic exploration. There's definitely an important role in precise photography and well-executed photography, but it is a language, and just like in novels or in film, there are films and novels that require precise language, that require technique, but there are also other ones that the lack of that polished look is something that works really well for the idea that's been communicated.
And I guess most photographers sort of do that because they have this commercial work, which is their bread and butter, and then there is this work that involves their whole being and soul, and that one feeds the other. And of course, you cannot do one without the other. You need your sustenance, and you need your work to come in from these sources, which and I don't think one can belittle the other, saying that, oh, it's just commercial work, because commercial work, as you say, is as important and as meaningful, just by way of it exposing you to so much, to so many people who are out there doing spectacular work in the different fields, also taking places. So I think it's very important, one, to make that feed your sort of inner work, which and sometimes a lot of commercial photographers forget to have this inner dialogue. They just get so totally trapped into that commercial work. So I guess people need to have this, which you are a great example of, to have this parallel lives, your feet on two different boats at the same time.
Well, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. I celebrate the commercial work. If it weren't for commercial work, I wouldn't be able to explore my more sort of artistic projects.
So there is a question from Vishwinder Reddy. He says, most of the buildings seem to be situated in isolated places. How is that possible?
Well, that's a really good observation. And actually, it's more of an artistic choice in the end, because although many of these buildings tend to be built on the outskirts of towns and villages, because that's where the available land is, they are often in between two other buildings. And in my initial exploration of the project, I found that had less of an aesthetic impact than the houses that I found that were standing alone. And so it became more of a choice to seek out the houses that were standing alone rather than a reflection of the environment that these houses are. But that's a very good observation, and that also sort of shows how the aesthetics of a project gets developed over time, and you start making a commitment towards a certain look, as opposed to you know, just yeah, those are decisions that you make as you go along.
Sarah Zama is asking, what does the design of a home tell you about a community?
What does the design of what, sorry?
What does the design of a home tell you about the person living there, or the community, or the group?
Well, that I think that's up to anyone's interpretation, really. I mean, the ones that I showed you of the indigenous community in San Juan Chamula and Chiapas,
right.
Definitely the design, those houses in their design would incorporate a lot of the sort of patterns in their textiles that obviously make reference to their beliefs and their past. You have to sort of come up with your own ideas of what the builder is trying to express in other cases. You know, you see a suburban American house with a sort of roof of a chalet from a ski resort, and you can make up your own mind about where this person got those ideas, or what movie he saw, or what part of America he lives in. I think that it's all really, you know, of course they're trying to express something, they're trying to show something, but you never really know what necessarily. But also a lot of these houses are built with people explaining what they want and sending WhatsApp pictures and references, and that being interpreted by someone else, and then it being executed. Wow. So often what is imagined is not really what happens at the end. Yeah. So it's hard to say what the intentions were and what the result is.
But you also mentioned how the academics and people in research work have suddenly noticed this kind of work, and they have been taking it seriously since.
That's very true, and I'm really happy to be a part of that. I you know, it's definitely not because of this project, but it's you know, this project I think is part of that sort of change in ideas, and it's really interesting talking to, when I give these talks to students in Mexico, because the last one I gave was for a private university which has a very expensive tuition, and so it's a very sort of, you're talking to a very specific public of very privileged kids.
I think with that we've come to the end of our session. Thank you, Adam. It was wonderful to learn from your such varied experiences of photography, and especially your series about free architecture. And I'm sure a lot of people attending our talk have taken so much back with them to both incorporate in their work and life in the time to come. Thank you once again for joining us from London.
Thank you, and I had a great time looking at your work also yesterday. So I was thoroughly impressed as well, and it was great chatting with you. And I'm so happy to be able to speak to people on the other side of the globe from me, and I hope to be there again soon. So if anyone wants to invite me to their house, please do.
Thank you.